Okay, hi there and welcome to this knowledge tutorial on early Elizabethan England. We're looking at exploration and a bit of a change in the focus. What I've decided to do is I've was looking at revision material from another teacher, and they had this really interesting question. I was there thinking, it looks a bit nightmarish, hence the Macaulay Culkin Home Alone face. And it's what's on the screen in front of you. The Virginia settlements were a complete failure. How far do you agree with this statement? I was there thinking, oh crikey, he didn't have any stimulus material, so obviously I thought the colony in Roanoke would be a good supporting point for this. And then I thought about the importing of new goods from Americas, tobacco, etc., and sugar. And then I thought, well, let's have a look and see how we could plan this out. If that came up, what would we do? So first off was really about looking at Walter Raleigh and kind of getting a bit of background on this before we have a look at how to answer the question. And as you can see, Protestant, born in Devon, a bit like Drake, fascinated by the sea. Again, don't confuse him with Drake. Took part in a number of operations against Spain on the high seas, and he was rewarded by Elizabeth with land and titles. He became an MP. He was also, I think, head of her bodyguards. He was a favourite of the Queen, but also quite arrogant, and we'll see some of that in his decision making later on. So why is Raleigh important? Well, it's because in 1584 he persuades Elizabeth to agree to an expedition to explore the coast of North America. We'll get into the details on it later on, but she grants him a royal charter, and if we read it, the quote there about to explore, colonise and rule any remote, heathen and barbarous lands, countries and territories not possessed by any Christian prince or inhabited by Christian people. That's really, really important, because one of the reasons, and we'll come into it later on, that Elizabeth allows Raleigh to colonise the North Americas is to be in competition with the likes of Spain and also France. But she's wanting to avoid conflict, especially with Spain. So she's saying, look, if they're Christian, i.e., Protestant or Catholic, and they've got trading posts there, we are not going to go there. Now, obviously, this was done with not just her kindness, but understanding that she gets a fifth of all the gold and silver that can be mined there. So no matter what anybody finds, 1/5 goes to her. So Raleigh is responsible for planning and organising and financing 2 voyages in 1585 and in 1587, but he doesn't sail with them. Elizabeth wouldn't let him leave the court, but he is given credit for founding the colony of Virginia. So why colonise it? Well, the first 2 reasons are actually linked together, and it's to have a base from which to attack Spanish interests. The Spanish were controlling the West Indies, they had treasure ships near there, and this is a way of ensuring that they don't have to sail all the way from England to manage to do that. Here they've got a base in North America, the West Indies are to the south, they can operate from there and be more successful. The other reason is to really stop France and Spain getting a colony there. At that point, no country had kind of taken on colonisation of that area. So this was a way to get England into that kind of colonisation of the Americas. Linked in with that is because there were stories of rich resources. We'll come on to that later on. And really the final reason of building up English territories. And it will make Elizabeth happy. Raleigh will be happy with that. But it also brings power and prestige to England. And the final reason, which is the 4th one on the list, but I've said it's the final reason because it's the weakest one probably, is it provided opportunities for the poor in England to start a new life. It meant that, poor relief wouldn't have to be kind of spent if you were able to get poorer people to move to the Americas. So, firstly, Voyage 1, 1585, what happens? Well, Raleigh sends 2 ships on a reconnaissance expedition. They go there, they have a look, they take notes and information on what it's like, and they came back with enthusiastic reports and said the land's really good for growing things, it's full of animals that can be hunted for food. They conversed with civilized Native Americans, and in fact they brought 2 back, Anteo and Wanchese, and they were brought back to England. A guy called Tom Harriot, who was a mathematician, learned their language, taught them English, and was able to create a dictionary which would help the colonists to establish contact. So it looks like it's all going to go really, really well. But before you can actually get started, you have to develop funding for this. the idea of a cost of colonization was huge. So there wasn't enough money to successfully colonize it in the New World just by trading. There had to be more than just that for economic benefits for somebody to say, I'm willing to invest in this. So Native Americans would barter things for simple, cheap English goods like wool and cloth. So there was an opportunity then to send relatively cheap items from England and get more important resources, more expensive resources that were in England from the Native Americans. The colony then would provide work for the cloth makers and merchants. People could see a kind of a link between the colony and England working. The colony could provide exotic materials like gold and tobacco, and that would bring in revenue for the English government. But even that wasn't going to be enough. Raleigh would have to fund the new colony. The Queen refused. The Queen was really, really careful with the money. If you remember from the first topics we learnt of with regard to Elizabeth, the country had been in lots of debt, or the Queen had certainly been in lots of debt due to Mary Tudor's terrible wars with France, and she was concerned about what was going on with Spain. She didn't want to be spending lots of money on a colony, but she did, however, say the land could be colonized, could be done in her name, Virginia. She also gave him a ship and some gunpowder worth approximately £400, which was quite a bit of money in those days, but not anywhere near as much as what Raleigh needed. However, Raleigh was one of Elizabeth's favourites. We've said this before, and with her backing, it gave prestige and it made it so that other investors would think, yes, I can do this and I will look good for the Queen as well. Raleigh was also very careful. What he did say was that Raleigh promised investors he would take any Spanish ships he came across and their cargoes. So it's almost like an insurance scheme with that. It didn't matter if the trading thing didn't go quite as well. It didn't matter if he was attacking Spanish ships. The cargoes would be claimed, the ships would be claimed and sold, and they could make money off that. So Raleigh invested a lot of his own money into the venture, and this was important. People needed to know it could work. If he's not putting his money in, why would they? By 1585, he had the money he needed. There was a problem though. They got 108 male settlers. Now, this clearly is not going to be a colony that can keep on lasting. They set sail under Ralph Lane, and he got off to a terribly bad start. The supplies of food and the cropseeds were damaged by seawater, so when they arrived, they didn't have enough food, and they didn't have enough food to kind of last through, and the crops they had, the seeds they have, wouldn't be able to be planted, or enough it wouldn't be able to be planted to develop enough of a harvest. They did, however, build a fort on Roanoke Island, which is shown on this image here. And at first the relations with the Native American tribes were good, but there was a problem. Some started to get angry because the colonists were taking food and they were taking good farmland and resources from the Native Americans. And in the end, Lane was forced to abandon Roanoke. And in the end, Drake picked up the starving colonists on his way back from the West Indies and they returned to England. So in effect, Voyage 1 was a bit of an abject failure. But Raleigh was determined to learn from what had happened, and he decided this time you need families, you need more people than just soldiers going there. You need to develop your better skill set between the colonists going. They can't just be kind of soldiers who can hunt and scavenge and stuff. You need people who can operate and survive developing a colony. Now, they headed further north to what would be Chesapeake Bay. That had a better harbour area than Roanoke. However, they were forced to land at Roanoke again because of hurricane season. Much like before, they had a problem with harvesting and sowing seeds. This time it was because they arrived too late to plan next year's harvest. And Native American links with the colonists were still quite poor because of the previous expedition. Now, John White, who was the leader of the expedition, he returned to England to get more ships and supplies, but there was a massive problem, the Spanish Armada. Because of this, he only got to return to Roanoke in 1590. When he arrived, he found the entire settlement deserted. A mysterious message was carved onto a tree saying Crow, meaning what they thought meant Croatoan, which was a Native American tribal area. But when he looked to find them, there was no evidence of them there. And it's led to a huge mystery as to where they went. Some people have suggested that the colonists had died out of disease and malnutrition. Other people have suggested they moved further inland. Other ones have suggested they split up, actually, some moving inland, some moving to Croatown, and linking with Native American tribes there and surviving that way. So why did it fail? Well, you can pause this and have a look at it. But looking at this, we've talked about the food supplies and the seeds. We've talked about that. That then links to saying that people were malnourished, seeds were sown at the wrong time or simply too late. With issues like that, disease would spread quickly. We've talked about, therefore, the poor relations with Native Americans and the fact that the colonists ended up relying, though, on Native Americans for food. So it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. Now, if we go back to that question we had on the very, very first slide, we should be able to draw some elements of this together and basically look at some opportunities to apply some points and some evidence. So the Virginia settlements were a complete failure. How far do you agree? Well, you can agree with it. You can talk about the colony of Roanoke and then describe what happened, or even the first voyage as well. Then you can explain how that was done by poor initial planning, and clearly, even by the end of this particular topic, there's not a successful colony that's been developed. So in that respect, you've got fantastic evidence to prove that. As a counter, we do have the fact that they returned a profit because they did attack Spanish ships. We've also got this idea that it increased, there were excited merchants with new goods, such as the potato and tobacco, and those points there did lay the foundation for an eventual colonization. We've also got an increased impression that Elizabeth was a powerful monarch by having these new lands, and that actually those things, although the colonies didn't establish and work, do say that it shows it wasn't a complete failure, that there were successes within there. Well, I hope this has been useful. It's a bit longer than the normal one, but we've gone through a couple of issues. If there's any queries or comments, please feel free to put a comment on the bottom. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.